If I need to.
Oh, kia ora koutou. Oh.
Oh, that's good. Yep, right.
Yeah.
Good. So is it? So you've been literally locked up. You haven't gone
Yeah,
out.
yeah, yeah. No,
bugger.
I have gone. I've gone out for a walk, but not even today actually, because it's been,
And
you know.
oh, and have you been feeling? Because
Uh, I'm fine now, but I'm still positive, as it were. Well, although I got I'm a bit chesty, Bernard. It's 16:59.
oh, good. Oh, well, I'm glad that it's not like painfully awful, because often it is.
No, it hasn't been so far, and I'm very lucky. I think, very fortunate indeed.
Cool. Did you watch the debate? I've managed to
No.
avoid it.
No, I watched a tiny bit of the one the other day, the earlier one, and I managed to decide not to watch this one. This week.
Paddy's always better. He's much more.
Yeah, well, I don't
entertaining
think
as a host.
Yeah, he is. He's a very entertaining chap. He's got a great voice for television. Or great, what is it? A great face for radio. What's that expression?
But
Yeah.
he is one of those.
He's a
few
wonderful
sort of
man.
TV
Yep.
stars. Like people love him. People grab him in
Yep.
the streets.
Now, are we getting this thing going or what? It's 1700.
I think we are. I can assume that we're on air, so to speak. Cool. And I can see. Yep. Oh, Simon says all good on YouTube. Alrighty. We hope there's a few people there. Okay. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Tēnā koutou katoa, and welcome to the Hoon. I'm Bernard Hickey with Peter Bale from Hoon Bay. How are you, Peter?
Bernard, I'm pretty good, thank you. I've got COVID, and so I'm just bloody desperate to see you and Simon and all our audiences, even if some of them do think I'm a prat sometimes, although they also say, just keep being a prat because we love it. But anyway,
Yeah.
this is the most social thing I've done this week. My daughter and another person we both know has delivered me little food parcels from time to time.
Oh, right. Did
And
they
it's
slipped it
been,
under the door and then run away?
More or less, they've slipped under the door and run away, and I'm very grateful to them
Wow.
both. Otherwise, I might have gone completely round the bend. I mean,
So
I
they
have
didn't have
more or
like
less gone
a
round the
small
bend.
hose pipe. They just put in the soup, through the.
Well, yes, it's been more the Chardonnay and the Sauvignon Blanc. Yeah, but yes, exactly.
That's good for your chest. Yeah.
Yeah. So, but I think I've been very grateful, and I was actually thinking, having avoided COVID completely over the last 3 years of being in New Zealand,
Really?
which is pretty amazing. I was both very grateful to Jacinda and also to Michael Baker and Ashley, and I was thinking that my discipline about it has kind of eased off in the days or so, because I just I don't want other people getting this, so I'm still trying to be responsible.
Oh, good.
I'm trying to be a good
stuff,
boy,
yeah.
Bernard.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. I think you're right. A lot of people have forgotten about COVID and sort of are not taking it as seriously. I must say, I've become actually more conscious of it over the months and years, and try wherever I can to mask up going into places where it's a bit riskier. So
Yeah, well, I
it's,
think Bernard, we still have to be responsible for each other. We still have this new variant that's come out now, and it knocks you about. I mean, I've been turbocharged and had as many bloody vaccinations as you possibly can have, and I'm very grateful for all that. But I also had pneumonia a few years ago when I was working at CNN and I was traveling a lot. I literally was that passenger in seat 1A, coughing and spluttering and communicating bad things to everybody. So, I don't want to be Typhoid Mary.
no. Well, it's been
So,
a busy
what are we
old
doing
week.
today? Now, also, you have to. Speaking of being ill,
Oh,
you have to explain why we missed last week, and also, I think we do have to work out that if I am your co-host, we have to work out a way that we can, you can flick it to me so that even those who think I'm a prat can still.
Oh
you
yeah,
know, tune in.
Absolutely. Yes, it was one of those last-minute things. I'd been on a bus and got off the bus feeling very, very green about the gills, and just really couldn't. You wouldn't have wanted me on.
Yeah.
On a,
Are you a car
camera
sick
or-
person, Bernard? You don't strike me as a car sick person.
Well, I've managed to avoid it happened to be a bus on a very windy road. And when I was a kid, we did get car sick
Oh,
a
God.
lot. So it was me and my three brothers in the back seat of the Kingswood. And we used to go from a place called Galatea, so Eastern Bay of Plenty,
Yeah.
across the old Napier Taupo Road
Jesus.
in the 70s. And it was mostly gravel at that point, and it was very windy. It's not the very smooth path that it is
Yeah.
now. And so all four of us would get sick at various points along
Good
the
Lord,
trip.
that's disgusting. That sounds absolutely
So we're all
ghastly. Yeah.
slithering back and forth in the back seat of this vinyl seated
In your own
Holden Kingsford
vomit,
suit.
like a bunch of sailors on the Endeavour. Yeah.
And really, we all tried to get, "Hey, Dad, stop the car!"
Yeah.
And
Jesus Christ,
you
you just bloody toughen the hell up out there, you.
No.
Did he just throw a hogget in the back with you?
So it was like open the window out. Yeah.
Yeah.
So so it was often there was streaks down the side of the car.
Oh, Jesus. Bernard. So, TMI. Too much information. So was the reason that you were taking a bus, though, from Glenorchy to Queenstown was because you're too stingy to have taken the Kaka Learjet down there? Is that right?
Yeah. I should have taken the Learjet. It would have been better. But no, it was a great weekend. I really enjoyed it and got to talk quite a bit about transitions, and actually there was a lot of discussion about security and AI, which
Oh, really?
was
What
quite eye-opening.
were you speaking at, Bernard? Was this at your conference, or was it just
it was
personal
a-
conversations about security and
It was
AI?
just personal conversations about geostrategic issues. It was fun. I really enjoyed it, and
Yeah.
a bunch of people that I'd seen before.
So you
It was
weren't
great.
too sick to speak?
No, but so basically this was Friday night. By the time I got there wasn't much on, and then by Saturday morning I was fine. So
Oh,
it
good.
was-
So you
it
didn't
was
miss
good.
it. So, but we can apologise to all of our lovely listeners for.
Yeah, sorry about
Because
that.
oh
guys.
no, it's just because David Coombs and a couple of others said to me, in fact, Professor Patman said, what happened? Where were we?
Yeah,
and so it's
I
very
thought
nice
I
to be
mentioned-
missed. Thank you very much.
No,
Well,
that's good.
for Bernard to be missed.
Yes. So today we've got quite a bit coming up on not just the climate, but
Oh, tell them where you
issues.
are, though, Bernard. Too. More importantly, you're in
So
Singapore.
I'm in Singapore and enjoying it here. This is another one of these painfully carbon emitting trips, which I'm going to try to reduce as much as I can. And
Or just offset it by just walking around to my place for dinner when you get back.
I think it's a lot more walking than that. This is the problem. And yeah, you can only plant so many trees, and this is something we're starting to come to grips with. And no doubt there'll be plenty of people on the call here wondering, enough with the flying. And I get it, actually.
Well, speaking of whom, that's a very
Yes.
nice segue to Catherine.
Yes,
Hi,
it is.
Catherine.
Hello.
Hello,
Hi.
Catherine. How are you?
Good, good.
We've sort of segued into talking about the climate, and it's been an election where there's been some climate talk, but for me the really sort of disappointing thing was the little exchange there was in the debate a couple of weeks ago, where the two leaders, the two Chris's, were asked about what they were doing to reduce climate emissions, and their answers were, we were recycling and we've got electric cars.
Well, the electric car one is not completely bad, but yes, carry on.
Well, yeah. And
Do you think a New
Catherine-
Zealand Prime Minister
Recycling-
is going to say, Jesus Christ, we've decided to stop eating meat, and we're also
Well, maybe-
we're also
maybe
eating
we
only
should.
plant-based milk? Oh, Jesus Christ, I've just lost my catto.
I mean, that was the thing, actually, is that, eating less meat or taking meat out of your diet is one of the more effective things you can do, as far as behaviour
Absolutely,
changes
yeah.
go. And instead, recycling is something like number 60 on the list of it's a good thing to do. It's not a bad thing to do.
But you don't
And it's
necessarily
important in terms
recycling
of- for emissions.
carbon
reduction.
for emissions. Exactly,
Yeah,
it's a good thing to
exactly.
do anyway. Yeah.
Yeah, and the same with driving an electric car. A much better thing to do is to mode shift to public transport, walking,
Oh,
cycling, all
Jesus.
of those sort of things.
Can
They
I
will
just say
save
there's
you
going to be
far
no
more
mode
emissions.
shift in the Bale household? Thank you very
Really?
much. Well, I do
But
have an
you were-
AT card, but mode
Yes,
shift. Jesus, I
and-
want a really, really sexy electric car, Catherine. I was just looking today at whether I should spend 130,000 New Zealand dollars on a 1962 Volkswagen Carmen Ghia that's been converted to electric. I bloody love that idea.
I don't think you understand just how wonderful it is to glide down a leafy boulevard on an electric bike that's doing all the work.
Oh, no, I totally do. No,
It's
I
glorious.
absolutely do. Yeah, but I'm too young for an electric bike.
Really?
Yeah.
But what you could get is one of those really, really racked up electric scooters. You know, the ones that go like
I do.
100
The
kilometres
ones
an
that Patrick Smelly tested for, not scooters. He tested a very natty little electric motorbike. And you're right, I have thought about that. So yes, more vehicles
actually-
with more wheels is what I'm after, Catherine. And I
I had
also,
an electric motorbike in
Yep.
Hanoi for a couple of years, and I loved it.
yep, they're
Yeah,
brilliant.
yeah. Because Hanoi actually really needs a lots of electric bikes as opposed to the putt-putts with the lots of smoke, which is...
So, Catherine, rather than
Yeah,
talk
but-
about our own modes of transport, because Bernard's mode of transport is a 777 to Singapore.
not every day, but...
Do you want to
yeah,
bring us
no,
up to date with the climate stuff this week? Climate stuff, because it both domestic, but also there was a very interesting IEA report about how much we have to get rid of, but also a very positive statement, which I may prove to be a little half-assed, by Fatih Birol, the head of the IEA, that the pace of development of wind and solar globally was just astounding and was ahead of target.
Yeah, and I had to laugh actually when I heard because in his statement he said that they felt that demand for fossil energy was going to peak before 2030, and the demand would come down after that. And I seriously have my doubts about that. At the moment, if you looked at total global energy, sources of energy, wind and solar account for something like 1.6%.
Yeah.
And this is after 30 years of a transition, a carbon transition going on. So even if you double or triple or quadruple that, that's still a hell of a long way to go. And also, it's also an important point to make, I think, is that if you're not decreasing fossil fuel usage at the same time as you're building renewable energy, then you're not actually helping the situation at all. In fact, you could be making it worse in terms of other planetary boundaries, because every time the energy supply goes up, material throughput goes up,
Absolutely.
GDP goes up, and you threaten other planetary boundaries.
I do wonder about the IEA when it suggests that somehow demand for energy is going to plateau and then fall. But we know that GDP is globally rising, 2-3% per annum pretty much every year. They're essentially making the assumption that there's going to be a very rapid and large disconnect between GDP growth and energy use, which we haven't really seen ever, have we?
They've actually recently they've put out some new pathways, and within only 1 year they've had to remodel their assumptions, because a lot of the things that are supposed to be happening, like carbon capture and storage and hydrogen development, all these other things aren't happening at the pace that they anticipated, so they're having to change their lines. And some of the stuff that they have in their modelling, it's just like you get a line going along like this, and then suddenly it just abruptly drops off, and you can see they've drawn a straight line from where we are to where we need to be, and just kind of assumed a bunch of things can happen.
Not specific New Zealand questions, Catherine, but I noticed a couple of things this week. The US LNG industry is booming, as you probably know, for the export of LNG mostly to Europe to offset Russia, which is one of the reasons I always totally mistrusted Senator Cruz objections to Nord Stream. But they're not only so that
Sunak in the UK.
Well, they've just announced the largest
exploring as well.
Yeah, but that's a different. So this LNG is from fracking in Texas, from the amazing Permian Basin. So that's going to go, absolutely gigantic. And then yes, you're right. Rishi Sunak this week, or the UK government, announced the development of I think it's Rosebud, which is kind of ironic if it was Rosebank. The last Rosebud, of course, was the
Citizen Kane.
A Citizen Kane scooter, exactly, which is not entirely. We're not allowed digressions in this. I'm the one who does the digressions. Thank you, Catherine. But this is one of the largest developments in the North Sea since the North Sea was first discovered. There's virtually no gas; it's all oil. It's actually mainly Norwegians who are developing it, and they will get, I think it's $97 per $100, not £97 per 100 of investment back in tax from developing this oil field. I mean, and then you've got this other thing that Rishi Sunak's doing, which I think we're going to see in New Zealand, or to some extent we certainly have. You're going to see it in Sweden, which is this retrenching, going back on various net zero commitments, and this kind of friend of the car. And I can tell you, I think we're going to see friend of the car coming back in New Zealand.
Yeah, I just think they've underestimated how hard some of these changes are actually going to be, how steep the curve is if you actually want to aim for net zero. And I don't think they've communicated that very clearly to their populations at all.
No.
A lot of the hardest changes, they push them out into the next electoral cycle, hoping that the hard stuff
or
will
the
be
next
done by
5.
somebody
Yeah,
else.
exactly.
Yeah. And they also kind of build on these assumptions about, people will be richer in the future, so they'll be able to afford to do more of the hard lifting, heavy lifting then.
Yeah.
Or we'll have some new technology that will do it all for us and we won't have to make
Magical
the effort.
thinking.
Yeah, magical thinking.
Yeah.
And as soon as the magical thinking kind of starts to enter into the phase where you actually need to deliver these things, I think they're going to push them back out. It's not going to be very fun to watch, not very edifying, and the long-term consequences, or even not
Are
even
shocking,
that
but
long-term,
we don't.
short-term, are
That's exactly what
catastrophic,
seems.
but
Yep.
yeah.
It's very interesting to me if I look at the UK, where of course I used to live, and I just think, which focus group are they listening to? Because somebody has told them that being the friend of the car owner is going to be the right thing, and I suspect it's a little bit like some of the things here. Mind you, Bernard, I did, I did see a promotion or a description of a 6-wheel drive Ford Ranger that can be specially made today. And I was so close to ordering one just to piss everybody off. But it is really remarkable. The whole Rishi Sunak's now talking about reducing councils' powers to impose 20 kilometre an hour speed zones, all of this kind of thing. And I can just see there's something we'll talk about this, I guess, when we get to New Zealand politics. But there's a lot of kind of eliding going on between various right-wing ideas, the climate, and all sorts of things, and they're coming here as well, as within the bat of an eye.
This happy clappy kind of, it's all on track for green growth, and we're going to do all of these things and build all this renewable energy, and it's all going to be fine. And the gap is just between reality and what's actually happening, the mythical visions of the future is just turning into a crevasse.
It's all telescoping in over the next year. In fact, this year really has been the year where not only has it gotten much warmer and much warmer than we thought it was going to be, but the weather events have been more sort of dramatic and catastrophic. For example, this weekend there's a really big chance of an enormous dump of rain on New York City and Long Island.
We'll be reading a lot about that then. Because it's always, there'll be some lunatic tied with a rope to a lamppost being blown to buggery. Saying,
the Americans do that sort of weather.
They do that very well.
So well, don't they?
Yep.
And it's pretty wild there in Hoon Bay.
It is.
And it really is the rubber hitting the road. Either you do something about it, or you have to acknowledge that you're not doing something about it.
Yeah.
Right
So
now,
how do we bring it back to New Zealand, Bernard and Catherine? Because we do like to tour the horizon, but we've got an election going on. It seems to be heading very strongly towards various parties that support the motorist and support a huge amount of individualism. What can we do? What's the message for New Zealanders?
I just wish somebody would be honest about what our real options are here, because there's an enormous amount of disruption coming up for us no matter what we do. Either there's a lot of disruption from a very abrupt decarbonisation process, or there's a lot of disruption from actual climate change. And in fact, best case scenario, we get a lot of disruption from both, because the climate stuff is going to happen anyway. So, I just don't think they've been honest enough with people about what this really looks like, and what the consequences are.
And the consequences might not be just the physical ones, but also other forces pushing down on New Zealand that the politics can't control. So, for
Yes.
example, finance. So when you look at what's happening with insurers, just in the last couple of weeks, IAG, which is State, AMI and NZI Insurance, have announced they're pulling out of insuring the Category 3 properties and are looking to dramatically reprice the Category 2 properties. They're going through the country, street by street, gully by gully, floodplain by floodplain, and dramatically repricing. And what we've seen in other countries is the insurers have pulled out completely. Once the insurers really start talking to the banks here, and because of the importance of
the government will be the last line of resort. Yeah.
Well, this is the thing. We're going to have really big debates about, whether or not all of those frontline properties at Omaha get bailed out by taxpayers.
Well, bugger Omaha. Jesus Christ,
Yeah.
where I live, as I know, Bernard, I just discovered the other day that there's going to be 6 months building work next door, which I totally support, of course, to reinforce the cliff where it fell away from the apartment block. And now, just to sort of completely complicate this and probably make Catherine's eyes roll, and I was going to discuss this in last week's one, I went up in a helicopter the other day around Auckland. It was an extremely economical little weenie helicopter, if I can.
one of those
say
Robinson
that.
ones. They flew
No,
out of the
no.
sky a lot.
I was so pleased not to go. We can discuss Robinson helicopter. I was so pleased it wasn't a Robinson. It was a dear little French thing, about the size of an acorn, and I squeezed myself into its little capsule and was taken off. And it was absolutely gorgeous just to look over Auckland, but to go round the inner Waitemata coastline to the Manukau, the damage is just spectacular. Of course, the damage is not caused by the helicopter's own emissions, of course. I just had to go up and see it, so it was an entirely professional exercise. But, the damage on some of the coastal properties is just absolutely phenomenal. And a lot of it you can't see as well, like around Titirangi. It's whole hillsides, and right up into the into the Waitakaris and around Watapu or Whatapu. It's just phenomenal. So,
What I find
we are in the
interesting-
middle of this, and I think we should just go out in helicopters a lot more to see how bad it is. Go ahead, Catherine. I'm sorry.
Sorry. What I'm kind of find interesting is the big sinkholes opening up under major new highways that they've just built. I mean, good luck with your electric cars.
When you
across
say
the sinkholes.
when you say major new highways, isn't this the one? Because
the one up
well,
north.
actually, the one up north. Is there one on the way to Puhoi as well? There's a reason they call it
the
Puhoi
big
now.
new part of the motorway that goes up north has got some severe subsidence issues going on up.
Oh yeah, no,
because of
absolutely.
all
Yeah,
the
that is
rain.
Puhoi. But now we
Yeah.
can't swim or surf or fish in the Waitemata at the moment because of a
Yep.
bloody thing in Parnell. Now, we know some people who live in Parnell, and it's their turds, not mine, that are going in there at the moment. I'm very, very concerned about it. But as you just slightly digress back to Bernard's trip to Queenstown, this is all very good things for Three Waters, right? As well,
Yeah.
Yes,
you know.
sir.
Yeah, and it's another symptom in this election where we're not addressing the real issues. We have population growth running at 100,000 per year. We're not investing in the infrastructure that's needed for it. We haven't invested in infrastructure for the last 30 years. Some of these things are now coming home to roost,
Yeah,
like
they
the
really are.
collapse of this big pipe. And it is something that, again, we're not talking about. All the main parties are loosening migration settings and are very happy to take the money from the extra GST and income taxes and the extra votes from median voters, happy that their land prices are going up with all this migration and the rents on their rental properties. But
Catherine, next week, let's do a little session in your one, because we might even get Corinne back in again. But what can we do journalistically to do better at this? Because you're not a traditional journalist. You're a climate expert. Because I think we need to address some of these issues about why these questions are not fully being absorbed and understood. It's also very easy to run away from them too. Because they're a bit scary.
Yeah,
which is the
I think
populist
that's
message.
great. Yep.
Yeah, thank you.
Yep.
Yeah.
And speaking of big
Catherine,
pipes, there's
thank
Robert.
you very much. Cheers. Hi, Robert. How are you? Great to see you, Robert.
It's very good to see you.
Thank you. Good to see you.
Bernard grovelled and apologised for not being there last week, but he wasn't very well, and he wasn't
you better,
prepared to hand you and I the keys to the kingdom.
Well, next time I'm not feeling well and we have enough time, I will throw the keys at Peter and he can fire up the electric V-dub.
So, Robert, how are you? I mean, what's on your? I mean, I know what's on my international radar, and I sent you, I think, my thing this week. But what's on your international radar? What's causing it to go beep when you look across the spectrum?
Well, I think it's some of the usual things and some of the things that we've discussed before. I think the US-China relationship's very interesting, and I think the Ukraine situation is conflicting versions of what's happening there. The Nagorno-Karabakh situation flared up this week. So, yeah, I'm also interested in the lack of foreign policy coverage in our election, which is
all right. Let's start with that, and work backward. Not to turn this into the media show, but I had a little conversation with our lovely friend Patrick Smelly about this the other day on Twitter, because a young, quite well-known New Zealand journalist tweeted, why are we even asking the party leaders about foreign policy when they're both on the same page? And I thought, are they? I don't believe that Jerry Brown. I don't believe that Jerry Brownlee and Nana Mahuta are anywhere near on the same page.
Well, they could be, but one way of testing that out is to ask them some decent questions. One thing that really,
you should be a journalism professor.
That really disappointed me, although it improved in the second leaders' debate, but the first leaders' debate on TVNZ, where they were both asked a question about what would New Zealand's position be if China invaded Taiwan. By definition, neither politician could answer that without causing an international incident. So, to me, that was very disappointing. A better question would have been to both leaders: what would be your number one foreign policy priority if you're elected?
Yes,
and I think a lot of Kiwis would have been interested in that, because there's a lot going on in the world. Some of us feel that New Zealand's not doing enough in terms of supporting Ukraine, for example. It'd be interesting to hear what the two leaders feel. And
I think we need an entirely new... Yeah, Robert, I think we need an entirely new Substack or blog or, some sort of major commentator, possibly a journalist with some international experience, to just write regularly about and possibly interview professors.
For you.
What a brilliant idea. But, Robert, it is true. I mean, it is so bizarre that we are completely dependent on international affairs and international revenue and everything like that. And I had to listen to Chris Hipkins speaking to Alistair Campbell on the excellent The Rest is Politics leaders session. And Chris Hipkins came across as highly intelligent, thoughtful, the normal considerate sort of decent bloke from Lower Hutt. But he guaranteed he wasn't talking about bloody sausage rolls. He was talking about China and really important stuff.
That's a really interesting. I'll put a link to that interview into the.
This was Chris Hipkins and Alistair Campbell.
Yeah, it was really good. I'm sorry, I should have sent it, because we basically communicate all the time, just whinging and complaining and worrying when I'm going to get a new media career. Now, shall we move on for a minute to, because I think you're absolutely right, shall we move on to a little bit to Ukraine, because I think we've reached peak Ukraine, and I think, I'm not saying it's a done deal, but there is no penetration of the Russian lines. The Russian lines are so formidable and so long, and even the US government shutdown now is linked to Ukraine. Are we at grave risk of just sort of...
I don't think it's a done deal or it's reached stalemate. I think, in fact, the last week has been pretty sensational for the Ukrainians. I mean, the attack, which they took out quite a substantial leadership of the Russian Navy's Black Sea Fleet.
Yeah.
We don't know, of course, whether Admiral Sokolov is dead or not. Apparently, his life after death and all that, videos, and we'll have to wait on that one. We do know that the Russians are very reluctant to openly acknowledge reverses like that. But irrespective of whether Admiral Sokolov is alive, this was an incredible attack in broad daylight. They not only attacked the naval headquarters of the Russian Black Sea Fleet, but they also clearly targeted what was a meeting amongst the leadership. So that shows they have pretty good intelligence on what's going on. And Crimea is becoming a pattern now. They are really targeting Crimea. And even the Russian commentators are acknowledging this now. So I don't think we're at stalemate, because the Crimean situation, Crimea's been used as a vital artery for supplying
Yes.
some of the Russian position and launching attacks on Ukraine.
Yeah, I mean more about our international position, Robert, whether it's just getting... I have this nervousness that, there needed to be a breakthrough. I was trying not to be sort of too campaigning on this, but that there needed to be a really serious penetration. But also, I think that the scale of those Russian defences are absolutely formidable. And then, as you say, though, we've got these rather striking spectaculars, as Al-Qaeda used to call theirs, into Crimea and so on.
It's amazing that Ukraine hasn't got a navy, but it's effectively paralysing the Russian navy in the Black Sea. And it's not to be underestimated. This is what I call the slow chipping away of the Russian position. And it's going to have big consequences shortly, because
but
these
what
are
are you
logistical targets.
I mean, you're a professor of international affairs, as far as I understand, as opposed to a military strategist. What are you thinking at the moment about the? I mean, of course, we're going to promote you to being a military strategist when it suits us.
Yes,
well.
please.
What? Jesus, I do the jokes here, all right?
Sorry.
And no, it's all right. And
I know my place.
If only any of the three of us did know our places, we probably wouldn't be here. But Robert, what are you thinking about the international solidarity behind Ukraine?
Well, it's. I think it's reasonably secure in Europe, but it's fraying, with the exception of Hungary, of course. But they've always been in the Putin camp. But it's seriously fraying. I think the United States situation is making many countries like New Zealand and Australia nervous. I was in Canberra week before last, and it was very interesting talking to Australian military personnel and diplomatic personnel, and they were saying much what's being said in New Zealand, that the prospect of a Trump administration would probably be tantamount to ending American support for Ukraine.
And exactly.
It would. There are certainly some Republicans committed to Ukraine, but whether they would hold sway over someone like Mr. Trump's leadership, or even DeSantis, is
which I think we have to think that that's one of the reasons why Biden agreed to the ATACMS being sent, because he wants to get in and get as much as possible through now.
Yeah, but he's measuring these things out. He needs to be a bit bolder, I think. And it's drip feeding. The F-16s are arriving in October or whatever, and it's all being doled out very carefully. And I know Mr. Biden, it may be for domestic political reasons and also international reasons, doesn't want to escalate too quickly. But the Russians have taken a bit of a hammering cumulatively in the last few months. That yes, their defences are holding reasonably well, but there's some telltale signs of fraying in the Russian position. And I still think the Ukrainians have overall moved forward. It's not as quickly as they would like, but I think this sort of operations we've discussed before never been attempted before, and it's never been attempted certainly without an air force.
Yeah, no, we're all watching. But and also, Robert, just one small question, which is slightly obscure. The Slovakia elections could give us another Hungary. There's a chap in Slovakia who was another EU country, very much an all-bound kind of guy, billionaire, naughty chap, looks like he's a populist, or is a populist. I'm sorry. I'm worried about. The whole European edifice
and
as well.
I think this will go on while Mr. Putin's in power. And, we've discussed this before, so I don't want to drone on about it, but the far right in Germany, they've been funded by Moscow for a long time, and everyone knows this. And, people say, oh, that's a conspiracy. Well, from Mr. Putin's point of view, if he can sow discord, whether it's in the United States or in Germany or anywhere else, it's a victory. He's not worried about the
classic
outcome.
Hybrid war. Bernard, you wanted to ask Robert a question from your position in Singapore.
So just pivoting to the United States and China, one of the things that's been
since he's in Singapore,
somewhat encouraging in the last week or so is this talk of a summit between Xi and Biden, and Xi going to the APEC leaders meeting in San Francisco later this year, and also that there's been some of these working groups set up on the side between the United States and China to try to work out, or at least try to manage some of the conflict
Yeah.
that's going on behind the scenes and things like chips and trade and various bits and pieces. What's your view on how that's burbling along, that grinding tension between the two?
Well, there is a grinding tension, but I think that Biden's position is that America won't shirk from competition or engagement with China. And of course, they do. We've discussed this before, but Xi and Biden actually have a personally good relationship.
Theoretically,
It's
yep.
quite warm.
Yep.
Yes, and it goes back a long way to when Biden was vice president, and he cultivated quite a friendly relationship as vice president with the then new president of China in 2012. So I think the other thing is, I think there is. We discussed this again. Another issue, the game of musical chairs that's going on in Mr. Xi's leadership, with the foreign minister going missing and then dismissed, the defence minister going missing, and presumably he's going to get the same outcome.
He's being shot
I'm
out of a
wondering
cannon
if this
as
is
we
a
speak.
way of
Yeah.
Mr. Xi. He's signalling to the Americans, look, I was badly represented with regard to the Ukraine conflict. I know it's a catastrophe. Is this a way in which authoritarian leaders signal that they're kind of backing off? I don't know, but I think the other thing is, I think she's under pressure within the Central Committee of the ruling Communist Party in China, because the economy is going, the Chinese economy is not doing well. And,
But we have to be
we have
careful, Robert. If God forbid that we should ever, talk about some things that we've talked about before. You've apologised, I think, now twice for talking about things that we've talked about before. I listen to about 8,000 podcasts a week, and if middle-aged men couldn't repeat themselves, when we know that most dinner time conversations will be gone, and so would most podcasts.
Well,
May I ask you a question
We do
about?
have a particular set of skills. I mean,
Yes. Well, middle-aged men.
No,
being-
we do actually, get involved a little.
Yeah,
bit.
we recount these
and,
things.
And on that note, to improve, we're not just a bunch of middle-aged men, but also that we do have a particular set of skills. I wanted to invite Josie Pagani into the.
Jesus, she gets the star. It's like Dancing with the Bloody Stars when she comes on, isn't it?
Absolutely, it's great to see you, Josie. Thank you.
Actually,
very
we
much
should do that.
for
We should have. Robert's already said we need to do a live session, and I found just the right place quite near me to do it in.
Oh, good.
Yep.
Yeah, no, we definitely need to have. There needs to be a stadium. I think there should.
No.
There should be.
We're not ready for a stadium yet.
stadium. Will we fill it?
Yeah. No, I know. I have a place very close. I've just thought of this week, and it's bloody brilliant. Now, may I ask Robert a question for God's sake before Josie
go.
rudely? Because I think it's one that Josie will find important, and not question that find, but a subject. I was flabbergasted by Biden's announcement of, as he said, $40 billion. $40 million of aid to the Pacific.
Yes.
And we're going to support you. And then, within 2 days, I think it was the next day, the Department of Defense released some absolutely fabulous pictures of Minuteman missiles hitting Kwajalein Atoll in the Pacific. Like, we're going to give you money and we're going to give you independence, but here comes our missiles. What the hell is going on with the US engagement of the Pacific? Both of you.
Well, I think you're right to draw the contrast between the fact Mr. Biden stressing that America's engagement in the Pacific Island states is not an attempt to isolate China, and it's not an attempt to revisit some sort of great war, a great power rivalry. But at the same time, that significant timing with regard to the intercontinental ballistic missile was very, very interesting. And I think the Americans still, despite denials, do see the Pacific Island states in very strong strategic terms. And I think from the American point of view, China is seen as a big rival and a big threat. I mean, it registered with the Americans, they made no bones about it, that the Solomon Islands leader he was not part of the delegation that visited the United States. A number of American officials said they were disappointed. I think they put quite a lot of political capital in trying to make sure he would be there, and he didn't turn up. And so maybe that's seen that he's sort of lost to the Chinese camp. I don't know, but I think the Americans are they're talking a bit like the New Zealanders and the Australians in saying they want to address the needs of the people in the region. But I think when you listen to American commentators, they're still interpreting the importance of the Pacific Island states in terms of the competition with China.
Yeah. Robert, you just said a minute ago that it was interesting that the Defense Department released those images then and had presumably also done the test a little earlier in September. What do you think the motivation was to do it then? Or was it just being a bit gormless or a bit unsubtle?
I think it's clearly, I think it's an indication that the Americans are saying to the Chinese that we will compete with you in the region. I think that it's very difficult to put another spin on it, really, or another interpretation.
I think.
Josie, what do you think, please?
Yeah, I mean, so the Pacific Island Forum is coming up in early November in the Cook Islands, and I don't think you can't underestimate how wily and clever the Pacific are being about managing this geopolitical stoush between the US bloc and the Chinese bloc. I mean, one example is, last year when they all went to the Oval Office, the leadership went to of the Pacific, got invited to see Biden. And, Prime Minister Fiame of Samoa, she was one of the very strong voices saying to the Americans, you're going to take all of us. You're not just going to invite the US friendly country. You're going to invite all of us. We go as a region or we don't go at all. And so, and Biden and the US administration agreed to that. So they're and this will be a big topic of discussion at the Pacific Island Forum in November. They're very aware of what's going on. And if anything, PIF and the country's leadership are asking countries like New Zealand and Australia.
I had to think for a second what PIF was for a moment, but Pacific Islands Forum, yep. Okay.
Yep.
So, I mean, we can learn from them.
No, I absolutely agree with Josie. I think that's the key point. That
Jesus, steady on.
Pacific Island state leaders are determined not to buy in. In fact, they reject becoming pawns in a great power rivalry game between the US and China.
They've already been that, yeah.
And I think the Americans are paying lip service to their denial of their participation in that. But I still think the Americans are playing the long game. They're saying, oh, yes, we can address their needs, like trying to ameliorate climate change and help them with the infrastructure projects. But in the long run, that means they'll be favourably inclined to us. And why are they favourably inclined to us? Because it will help us see off the US
and we're not going to treat them like prawns or pawns.
No.
Robert, did you hear I loved Prime Minister Rambuka of Fiji, his comment when he was here in New Zealand. He said, we've been here before. Remember the Second World War? The Pacific was a theatre of war, and we were in the middle of a great power rivalry. So, they're going, you don't need to teach us how to do this stuff. Perhaps you need to listen.
Actually, that's a really interesting thing you say that, Josie, because I was really struck by several things. I'd love you to address this, because I'm sure you're the best person to address it unless the Professor of International Affairs wants to come in.
Oh.
Rambuka's rehabilitation as a world leader, or at least a regional leader, is pretty flabbergasting to me, since I covered the 1987 Fiji coups and played golf with him several times, or at least followed him round the golf course, interviewing him every morning for about 2 months. I can't remember which coup it was. But he's
I'm looking forward. Did he make you keep the score as well?
Oh, I could probably go. Actually, I have got a Rambuka T-shirt somewhere. But this
doesn't sound to me like you were taking that coup very seriously, Peter.
What? Excuse me. If you have access to the coup leader, because your stringer is writing his autobiography, which was a slight drawback. But anyway, following him around the golf course was an extremely good way to be close to him. And it did, but the rehabilitation of Rambuka is quite extraordinary to me. But I think you're absolutely right. Robert has often talked to us in the past about small nations getting together. I mean, is Jerry Brownlee going to do that? Is Nanaia Mahuta the better one to do that? What's the segue there? Did you notice that, Bud, by the way?
According to the debate, the leaders' debate this week, was it last night, the night before? I've lost track of time now. Where Christopher Luxon was asked who would he prefer as Foreign Affairs Minister, Judith Collins or Winston Peters, and his answer was, which is, I think you're meant to pick the person from your party, Mr. Luxon.
Yes.
So I think
he was.
Go on, Robert. Sorry.
No, I was just saying I picked up that as well, and it seemed to me that he was having a bit of a tough time in that debate generally, and I think I think he was not as composed as he would have been normally on that question.
No, and it was interesting actually. We were talking about the debate.
Yeah. You're even better than segues than Bernard is.
Yeah, that was. Well, Robert did that one. That was very
That
good.
was good.
I know.
No.
We're a smoothly oiled machine.
I shall be sending a box of chocolate fish.
Yeah,
to
we've mucked
Robert,
it up
thank you.
now. You see, you've just fluffed and battered it out, and it was a good
Yeah, I know.
segue. But you've got onto chocolate. So I think that it was interesting to me that Luxon was quite weak on crime, which was really a comfort zone for National, right? I mean, Labor we dropped the ball.
Oh, they
on
love
the
crime. Yeah.
crime. They've done the tough on causes of crime, and they've just forgotten the Tony Blair winning formula of tough on crime, tough on the causes of crime. And I thought that he revealed his weakness there, where he was asked about gang patches, and they're going to ban gang patches and gang funerals, and they're just going to ban it all. And Chris Hipkins was I think very wily, where he turned around and said, "Well, how are you going to get the patches off the gang members? Are the cops just going to come and tear them off, or how do you propose
that
to
won't be conflict at all. Yeah.
And I think what it reveals about a weakness for Christopher Luxon is that he's not good when he's pushed on a very direct question. How will you do that? How will you ban the patches? And he can't actually answer it, because actually it's a really hard one to answer. And
Josie, since we have one of the world's greatest international affairs professors there, can I pull you back? Because we're going to come back to the gangs. Although that was a segue, and then you took the ball, ran straight across the field, possibly did an own goal, and came back again. One of the things that Robert raised at the beginning before you came in, unfortunately, we need to have you in at the beginning of all of these sessions, I think, but was whether anybody in New Zealand gives a shit about the foreign policy of either of the parties. Because I was saying to Robert that I had an encounter the other night where I saw somebody, a journalist, saying, why are we even asking the leaders about international affairs? Because they both think the same thing. And I just don't think that's true. We need to get more of this, don't we?
Can I just say, before you answer, Robert, that was one thing that really stood out to me, was the lack of detail and even interest. Like the energy levels in the studio just went vroom when they talked about defense and AUKUS and the China v US and so on, and whether we would be combat ready. Should we be combat ready? I'm sorry, but a leader of the country right now at this time in history, with hot wars happening, in the other hemisphere, and Taiwan sitting there, we should have an answer to that. You should have an answer about AUKUS. It should be clear. But they were really. I think one of the things I noticed was that they were really focused on banning sugar and phones in schools. But when it came to, are we combat ready, and what do we want to do with defence, and what about AUKUS, they were completely pathetic, both of them.
What do you think that too, Robert? I mean, effectively you do, because I think but basically, Josie, Robert and I've agreed.
Josie's saying. I just was struck. I don't think our media are doing a good enough job, though, in pushing them on these issues, because New Zealand's critically dependent on what's called the international rules-based order. We trade with over 100 countries in the world, and we probably more than most developed countries depend a lot on the international environment in which we carry out our activities. And I appreciate they responded in a low energy way to the questions asked, but I think it was incumbent on Paddy to really press them. I mean, these are big issues. Is New Zealand doing enough to support Ukraine, which has been invaded by a neighbouring authoritarian regime? We have a huge stake in the outcome, because make no mistake, if Putin keeps land as a result of that illegal invasion, that will have reverberations that hurt this country. And then you could,
this is quite right.
And the other thing is that AUKUS, this is a potentially momentous decision for this country. I was just saying. Do
you mean what? We're going to kill all the AUKUS? AUKUS, AUKUS, not AUKUS. Oh, yeah, okay. Yeah.
I was saying to
Bernard, I thought they were attacking the boats.
I was in Australia recently, and one of the revelations for me was that the Australians are really getting serious reservations about being part of AUKUS, and this is not getting talked about very much. And they are really worried on two fronts. Firstly, the cost.
Oh, what a surprise.
The military now are having to cut back on their everyday exercises and routine activities to accommodate this huge payment of between 268 Australian billion and 368, and as one Australian observer put it, it's going to come in way above that. And the second point that's
It's
really
going to be
worrying
even
them-
more expensive than HS2 in the UK
and
when
the
it finally gets
second
done.
point
Yeah.
that's really worrying Australian commentators, not Australian commentators, but some people close to the action, policymakers, is the fact that it's very much a huge bet on linking Australia to America at a time when America may not have the Biden administration in place after 2024. Many Australians are as worried as New Zealanders are about the prospect of President Trump.
I was just
So-
Googling because it turns out Paul Keating was right. You know, do you remember when Australia
Yeah.
signed up for Walker Steel? And he was just hysterically amusing. He always is. I wish there was politicians like that now. You know, I mean, I think he labelled it the worst deal in all of history, the worst international decision by a Labor government. You know, our bloke has to spend all the money. I mean, he was just scathing about it.
Yeah.
And it turns
Now,
out,
Josie, I'm going to do a
thought,
small. I'm going to do a small segue here because we have to talk about. No. Forgive me, Robert, because we have to talk about some New Zealand politics. But Robert, as usual, you're most. Is that? Yeah, we have to send you more gin. Forget the chocolate fish. It's more gin, I think. But you're absolutely more than welcome to stay in, please. But Josie,
I'd love to because it's fascinating.
No. Please do.
Politics
This
great.
is well, especially. I think what this country needs is a sort of four-way podcast of you know, broadly thoughtful people, particularly, you know, Bernard, me, you two, that deals with these important issues, but also has a slight edge of fun with it. Josie, I was really struck listening to Winston Peters today, which I mean, also I hate the way we all call him Winston, because I thought he was being racist. I thought he was, which is fantastic to have a Maori or a person with, to have a Maori politician able to sort of say things that nobody else could possibly say is pretty extraordinary. But I was also reminded that if you talk to anybody at the foreign ministry, he was, since Norman Kirk, probably the best foreign minister from their point of view, because he actually got foreign policy. He got money for them. You know, would it be so bad if he was our foreign minister again?
it absolutely wouldn't. I was running Council
See
for
what I did
International
there?
Development then, and
Yeah.
yeah, we met with him. We'd meet with him every month or so, a couple of months. He increased the aid budget. The thing I noticed about him working with him in that aid area was he'd arrive in a very hot Pacific country with his full pinstripe suit on, and I remember, people think he's being a wide boy when he does that, and I remember he said to me, I do it because I'm showing respect for every
Yes.
leader I visit, in every country I visit, whether it's President Biden or whether it's the President Fiame of Samoa. I'm going to wear my pinstripe suit and show them the best respect. So he's absolutely loved in the Pacific.
He also doesn't sweat like Prince Andrew as well, but yeah.
Yeah, and I'd say he's probably almost more popular than Jacinda was at the beginning in the Pacific.
Yeah.
He was
Robert, what do
very-
you think about the idea of I mean, I think he's angling for finance minister, of course, but of course he would accept. Do you think
I
Robert
he's blot-
Patman
I mean,
was a
I
good
agree,
foreign
he
minister?
I think he was, but I think he's blotted his copybook since then. There was a secret deal between Labour and New Zealand First, which has never been revealed, which had a Russian clause. Mr. Peters wanted to resume the suspended free trade agreement. And he's certainly got a soft spot for populism. I mean, if you look at the reason I think he's blotted his copybook and why some international observers may not take him as seriously now as they did back in 2017 is because if you look at it, some of the comments he's made, the last election he had a lot of Brexiteers around him to try to get him over the 5%. I mean, and secondly, look at his campaign now. He's talking about taking the country back, which
Brexiteers.
is by definition
You
a
said Brexiteers.
non-deliverable promise. It's cynical politics. It's straight out the Trump playbook. It's exactly what Mr. Trump says, and I think that's really cynical. And
Christ, Robert, do you have
it doesn't
Do you have
impress
tenure
international
because
observers.
Do you have tenure because it's hanging by a thread? Once these buggers
don't
come
know.
in.
I get what you're saying, but I think that there's a difference between how Winston Peters campaigns and how he behaves when he's in government. And you're right about the Russian
Yeah,
thing.
that's true.
Someone who's being sanctioned by the Russians, and not only that, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs tweeted out a picture of me with a target on it. So
What?
yeah, so I don't
Really?
I don't want a foreign minister who's going to be friendly to the Russians.
Yeah.
Just
Okay.
saying.
Well, this will widen our audience when we manage to, make sure that all the Russian hackers and
Yeah.
teams there are dialing into the Hoon to make sure they hear what you have to say.
Yeah. Free speech, but not for bots. That's my mantra.
Oh, Bernard,
So-
you wanted to move heavily into New Zealand politics. Well, I actually thank you so much, actually, both of you. Though, I'm not closing this, but I'm so glad we've addressed the sort of domestic geopolitics because it's so important, and I just don't see it being dealt with adequately here.
Yeah, no. Well, maybe there's an opportunity for us to host a foreign affairs debate,
Or in fact, be
for
the foreign
election.
minister of New Zealand. Sorry,
Yeah,
I digress.
yeah,
Go
yeah.
ahead, Bernard.
No. So that was very interesting about the idea of Winston as foreign minister again, because one of the great things for both parties is that they get his votes, obviously, but they get to kick him overseas, so he gets out of the way.
Yeah.
And from a and he actually does have a track record as a foreign minister who achieved things. And we were all a little bit surprised when he did the Pacific pivot. Although it had another name from me.
Right?
Turned out he was very right. And actually,
Yep.
if you look at how New Zealand has changed its vibe on foreign affairs in the last 5 or 6 years, that Pacific pivot was prescient and certainly has helped us a bit in this process of contest between the United States.
Yeah,
and-
he is the Howard
and
Morrison
China.
of New Zealand politics.
One quickie though, Bernard. I'm not sure you're getting him out of the way by appointing him foreign minister, because I think we've had a bit of a tradition in this country of appointing foreign minister for domestic political reasons. The fact of the matter is, the world sees exactly what's going on in New Zealand. We're not some remote country which is cut off from everywhere else. Globalization has eliminated that factor, and I think, it may well be the outcome. Who knows what the outcome of the next election is? And he would have experience. He would come across as an experienced foreign policy player, and that may well be a credible appointment. But I don't think he'll be out of the way, because in the sense that New Zealand sometimes makes these appointments on the basis that this person knows where all the bodies are buried in the respective party that they've been selected by, and therefore let's get this operating into foreign affairs and we can forget about them. Foreign affairs, in my view, is probably the second or third most important appointment after the Prime Minister.
Yeah, but at least he's good at. I mean, like I said, if you talk to people in MFAT, or even if you read the MFAT history, which I slogged my way through for North and South, he comes across very, very well.
Yep.
Yeah, he's very
that's
light.
true.
And you've got to think in that New Zealand First Caucus, so they're polling, 5 to 6%. There's
Definitely.
3, and I know you were saying before, Peter, he's being racist. There are 3 Māori names. top
I
of
went
that
through them
list.
today. Yep.
So it's extraordinary. We're at a very interesting moment, I think, in Māori politics, actually, that you've got a consistent Māori view of what Māori politics is. You've got some of the iwi Leaders Forum and Māori academics coming out today accusing Winston of being a racist. And you've got, Shane and Winston and the top 3 Māori people on the New Zealand First list going bugger off.
Yeah, but isn't this we could do an entire podcast about this, and every day I'm launching another one along with my novel over dinner with
3
myself.
white middle-aged men and a white middle-aged woman. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Bring it
No,
on.
we can do one with 3 white middle-aged women. But that idea though that you've got a minority that is strong enough to have different views is such a sort of classic. You see it with all sorts of minorities. It's like, oh, hang on a minute, you're not. And it suddenly gives that minority much more power. I think it's a really perceptive thing. Thank you.
At the leaders' debate, you're always asked afterwards at the leaders' debate, who do you think won the debate? Which I think is a sort of the wrong question, because it's like the question really is, who did each leader do what they needed to do in terms of whatever their narrative is? But you'd have to say, if you were going to say who was the winner of the leaders' debate, Winston Peters. And who are we talking about now?
Because he wasn't even there. Yeah, I was just going to. Can I just give you 2 comments? One was from one of our followers, Hamish McNaughton, who said, "I know someone who's going to vote for him, presumably Winston, because he doesn't play the race card." And another one, John Graham, says the rehabilitation of Winston is starting to rival Rambuka's, which is actually quite good. Very good. I might steal that one.
I don't think
just-
we've ever done a coup, to be fair.
No. Just
Unlike
finally,
Australia.
Josie, you have been overseas and have come back, and while you're overseas, you were managing a panel with Keir Starmer. And I was curious to hear your view on how you think Chris Hipkins is doing, leading Labor, and how he's sort of fitting into the left, centre-left politics of what we're seeing around the world.
It's funny, Bernard, because everybody talks about overseas. They talk about Keir Starmer. They're worried that he's a bit boring, that he, could run at a pigeon and the pigeon wouldn't fly away. But actually, what you're seeing from UK Labour, and you're seeing it in the Democrats, you're seeing it in some of the social democratic parties, because the other person on that panel was the Prime Minister of Norway, Jonas Gahr Støre. I think that's how you pronounce it. And he was really
good work.
Impressive. And they are they're coming up with ideas. So Keir Starmer, and this is what Labour's not doing here, I feel, right? So they're coming up with new industrial plans. They're talking. Keir Starmer was talking about this axis of insecurity, and putting climate in a bigger vision about both insecurity, but also about making people's lives better off, right?
Yep.
So he doesn't talk about green jobs. He talks about jobs. Doesn't talk about climate change. Talks about economic change. And this is all about, the left trying to position the climate in a much bigger, wider, inclusive vision that's going to bring working class people with them. And
mind you, he does still look like the bald eagle in the Muppets.
Yeah, he was. It's funny. I sat in a room with him and Jonas before the panel. And it was really interesting watching two progressive leaders in the world today talking about this stuff and saying, "Hey, if you need any help, let me know." And you have a sense that there's a obviously there's sort of Labour parties and social democratic parties. They come together at these conferences and they support each other. And I haven't really felt that there's anything coming from New Zealand Labour in political theory about what the left is now. What is the big idea on the left? It's not, if it's not, we had the last big idea we had was redistribution of wealth. So what's the
well, that worked
idea?
well.
Yeah, we haven't done that yet, turns out.
Well, a friend of ours,
Oh,
sorry, go ahead, Robert.
No,
we're doing an extra half hour
It's an
tonight.
extraordinary statement by the Conservative Home Secretary that multiculturalism is dead.
Oh my gosh,
And
yes.
it seemed to me this was extraordinary given her own background, and also that of the Conservative Prime Minister.
Yeah.
They're almost a demonstration that multiculturalism has been successful. But Keir Starmer was very measured in his response to that, and I think many of his supporters expected much more of a full-throated, sort of much more energetic denunciation than that came. So he seems a very pragmatic, measured person.
I think he's been. I think Robert, he's been very careful because they're way ahead in the polls. It's a bit like National here, but even more so, and they've got a longer time to blow it. So I think that's where the reputation about someone said he looks like the next thing that come out of his mouth is and have you chosen a hymn for the service? So slightly.
Yeah, I mean when your rivals are eating each other like a pair of snakes, or fighting like cats in a sack, whichever metaphor you choose, you just let them stand back and let them do it. It is,
and he's been very careful.
Yeah.
He's picking his issues, and he's been very careful to stick to. He feels that the Labour Party in the UK and Labour parties elsewhere, and I would argue the Labour Party here, have moved too far away from working people. So he's focused on the back to basics bread and butter stuff, and he's not getting pulled into too much. So he is talking about immigration though, Robert, and he announced that just before we did our panel. He'd been in Europe and he announced this new policy of dealing with child traffickers, doing a deal with the EU, turning the boats back, but taking a bigger percentage of migrants, refugees, and so on. So he was being tough on migration in a way that would be compatible with, a sort of centre-right thing as well.
It's the two-party system, though, in the UK, and now enables the opposition to play almost win by default, because the Liberal Democrats, unfortunately, in Britain, have seemed to be Well, they're winning a lot of local elections, but don't seem to be very effective at the parliamentary level. And I was struck by the fact that Mr. Starmer will virtually not comment on the elephant in the room in British politics, which is the devastation done to Britain by Brexit.
Oh no, he won't.
But
that's a great
as you say, he's very careful not to do anything that could upset his party.
I think I've told you possibly before, Robert and Josie, about a cartoon from Private Eye from some years ago, which I will now email to you all, but which is a cartoon of people in a cocktail party with an elephant in the room, and they're completely covered in elephant poo. and the caption is something like, "I'm terribly sorry, it really is just an elephant." Our very intelligent friend of the pod, as people say, Ben Reid, who's a futurist down in Christchurch, said Luxon could still do a deal with Raf Manji in Elam.
Yeah.
That's Winston and that's Winston neutered. Option is sitting there right in front of him. Top would bring 3 to 4 MPs and sit on cross benches. I mean, as usual, Ben is playing three-dimensional chess, and I did see your eye rolling, Josie, and we'll come back.
No,
Carry on.
I actually think this is something that hasn't made any of the public discussion, and it's surprising that it hasn't because Christopher Luxon has a particular problem in that he doesn't want to work with Winston, and Winston obviously doesn't want to work with Labor. So at the moment, he's going to have to do a deal with Winston, and it's the last thing he wants. He also wants some sort of leverage, and having another option, and that isn't the Te Pāti Māori, would be pretty sensible. So the idea of a nod and a wink to the voters of Ireland, give me Top rather than Winston, I think there'd be quite a few voters in Ireland who'd be quite keen on that too.
There was a poll that came out recently where everyone got very excited because it looked like Raf Manji was ahead in Ireland, and then it turned out the poll wasn't quite what it said. So I think it's highly unlikely that he'll win. I mean, almost impossible. And I think it's too late for National to give him a nod now to do the cup of tea. But I disagree, Bernard, in that I think for Luxon, I think he actually wants New Zealand First there, because even though he will not say this, but he wants to have some kind of pushback to ACT. And I think it gives him options, a bit like John Key, who did deals with everybody, Te Pāti Māori, or Māori Party as it was then.
Xi Jinping. Oh, sorry.
No.
But it's very clever politics in MMP to be able to have options on either side of you. And I think that for New Zealand First and ACT, I think there is personal animosity there, but it suits them both to attack each other, because a strong New Zealand First brings out the ACT vote, a strong ACT it brings out Labor voters going, right, I better vote New Zealand First, so that there's a damper on the far right in this next government. So there's a bit of three-dimensional chess going on, but I think it suits them to have New Zealand First.
They're so intelligent. They're devils, cunning devils.
But he can't be using this coalition of chaos line anymore, because boy.
Yeah, exactly. Well, unless he brings in the gangs. Because I think we talked a few weeks ago, when he said that really awful thing about bringing the gangs into the coalition of chaos. It was like, it's going to be Te Pāti Māori and it's going to be the Greens and the gang. It's going to be a coalition. And I just thought that was so naughty. And now...
Yeah, I think that's the downside, though, Josie, isn't it? It's a great point you made. It would give Christopher Luxon some leverage by playing one against the other, ACT and New Zealand First against each other. On the other hand, it may reduce his policies to a state of almost incoherence. And because, I think there's some deep differences there. It's not just personality. And ACT's got a pretty strong right of centre position, which New Zealand First seems to be quite resistant to in some areas. So, yeah.
I don't know. I think they're fishing in the same pool a bit. That's been part of the problem, that they're both fishing for the sort of disenfranchised, anti-vax. They're flirting with it. They're not quite going there. And the anti, the sort of fears about
the anti-antis.
Yeah, but you're right though, Robert. There is New Zealand First is a little bit kind of old Labor in terms of its it's got working class appeal. It talks about manufacturing, about bringing jobs back to the regions. That's all very lefty stuff.
I think they want to reopen the freezing works at Petone, then they'll be set.
Yeah, but I think they've actually got more in common than they have not which
Okay.
is interesting. But you also have to say the coalition of chaos is on the other side too, right? I mean, and I think
Sure.
in some ways, if I was National, I'd be going through that Green Party list because Greens are doing really well, 14%. They're going to get a whole lot more
Yeah.
people coming. Who's on that? Who's going to come in that might be problematic for them?
It is interesting, though. In the past, we've anticipated similar coalitions of chaos, and they haven't transpired. I mean, a lot of people thought that the Labour New Zealand First coalition wouldn't work between 2017 and 2020. Actually, it worked reasonably well. It's particularly the personal relationship.
Chris Hipkins was
Yeah.
part of that. Yeah.
Yeah,
So
yeah. So maybe you're right. Maybe from Luxon's point of view, if he has to have a coalition with New Zealand First and ACT, they will all sober up once they're into power. You know, we're all tigers out of office, but once you've got the responsibility of power,
Yeah.
then
Or we're
that
all tigers on
can
our
act
own
as a bit of
podcast.
a incentive not to rock the boat.
Josie,
And
was there
it's
anything that
interesting-
you? I'm sorry, I did notice you wrote, quite understandably, because it's, and my intention is not. Do you recall now in the midst of time where I interrupted you there?
No,
When you
I
were in
don't.
full
I don't-
stream.
I would think I was wrong. Was I rolling my eyes? I'm terribly sorry, Peter. Wasn't it? It was.
No. I think it's entirely justified because it's sometimes hard to. No.
Getting-
So should we do the skate? Would you want to stay for the skateboarding dog?
Yes,
Go for
please.
the
The skate.
skateboarding
I think it's time for the skateboarding dog.
So
It's
my-
wonderful, by the way, to have all of us here, and I think it's great that we
Allowed
widen
it,
out
especially
to
having not had one for a week. I think we just
Yeah.
poor old Simon will be just thinking, "There's so much gold there. How do I splice it down to whatever's as if you had a limit."
No.
But
You'll be thinking they keep interrupting each other. How the hell am I going to edit this?
Well,
Yes,
thank-
but I
thank- thank-
you may not realise this, Josie, but I've become much better at it than I used to be. So, and everybody's going to go fucking nuts on the thing now. But the one that I thought was a good skateboarding dog this week was the Speaker of the Canadian Parliament calling out a Ukrainian war hero and getting applause from the entire Parliament before he realised that it was he had in fact been a Nazi. And I just thought. It was just one of those things where you thought, "What the fuck are you thinking?" Who was on your staff that didn't look up the sky and realise that? I mean, regardless of whether because the convergence of these issues are just so complicated. If only we had professors of international history and extremely skilled experts in international affairs to guide us in these things.
we could have saved this problem, if only Justin Trudeau had given us a call and dialed into the Hoon.
Or, this is what I was thinking. Chrystia Freeland, our old colleague at the FT, Bernard.
Well, this is
Deputy
this is
Prime
the great-
Minister and herself a Ukrainian Jewish person. Yeah, she's an amazing person. Not the nicest person to work for, but I respect her immensely. But she must have just about had a fucking coronary with that. Sorry, she
Well-
must have just about had a coronary with that.
3 swear words in the less than 1 minute, Peter. You're on a roll.
Yeah.
But,
Yeah.
and also Trudeau, who was there, who I have to say, he does have this slightly Ken doll persona. I mean, he's a good-looking guy, and he's wearing tight jeans and a big buckled belt, and he sort of stands with his legs apart and gives a good speech, and you're thinking, this is very Casa Doja, Ken doll. But anyway,
I did notice a picture of him with Modi the other day, where he seems to be wearing kind of novelty socks, and I just
They
thought,
were in the same. They were in the same room together.
well, no, it was during the G20 before he came back and shat on Modi from.
Oh, yeah.
We should
That
do
was
an
a
entire
story.
set.
We do my tsunami of name dropping from this Montreal conference, because I went out to dinner with a bunch of people in Santa Marin, hung out took career advice from David Miliband, and hung out with Tony
Jesus.
Blair and
Steady on.
So yeah,
But don't you think though
Yeah.
that David Miliband runs an organisation called the International Crisis Group, I think it's called, which makes it sounds to me as though he works for the Thunderbirds.
International Rescue. Yeah, he does. And he
International
looks a
Rescue.
bit
He works for the Thunderbirds. He's not as wooden as his brother, but yeah.
No.
Oh no, he's
Hey.
great. I'm very fond of David Miliband. I think he's great. Yeah.
On that note, where we're thinking about Thunderbirds,
I think we should just get rid of the audience now and just sit and
shall
chat
go.
to each other, which is basically what we've been doing anyway.
We should go. It's been wonderful to
Thank
see
you all.
See you all. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
I'm
Great
back.
to
I'm
see you.
back. I'm not throwing up.
Thanks,
and
Robert.
We will be back again next Friday. Ka kite ona, everyone.
Thank
Very
you.
random
Bye.
comment that I don't know context of that at all, but I'm glad you're well, Bernard.
He was ill last week.
I see. Right. Good. Thank you for not
See you
throwing
later.
up on the podcast.
No,
Bye.
definitely not. See you. Bye.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.